Meeting. Yeah. Okay. I'd like to call the Regional Planning Governing Board Project of Regional Significance Review Subcommittee meeting to order. This is primarily an online meeting with a presence at the TMRPA offices. And I will ask for a roll call, please.
Naomi Dewar.
Here.
Vaughn Hartung.
Here.
And Ed Lawson.
Here.
Non-voting member Beth Smith.
Here.
Hi, Beth. Welcome. I think this is
Hi.
your first official meeting of this subcommittee. And I believe you were at our last regional planning governing board meeting.
I was. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I think everybody got all the packet with all the materials. I tried to review almost all of them. I might have missed a few, but just for your benefit, Beth, we had, to my knowledge, I recall maybe 2 meetings, but we definitely had one pretty productive meeting where we met jointly with the Regional Planning Commission, their delegates with this subcommittee. And we went through a lot of things, and our focus at that time had been on really one particular project, but it had led to a larger discussion. So what I'm going to do at this time is call for approval of the agenda.
So moved. I'm already unmuted. Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And then we're open for public comment. And our clerk, do we have any public comment?
Not received any in-person or digital public comment at this time.
Okay, very good. We're going to move to the business of the day, which is again our main point of being here. And just to continue organizing or orienting everyone. So we had a project, and everyone will have some different recollection of how we got started. But I think the 3 of us, primarily myself, Mr. Hartung, and Mayor Lawson, all felt that we should probably look at reevaluating what is a project of regional significance. It seemed that the numbers that have been established were somewhat arcane, didn't necessarily link up to today's world. Maybe we're too small in some cases, and then maybe too big to capture impacts that we were experiencing. And so our staff did a lot of work in terms of, and I'm looking at a number of the attachments here, history of projects of regional significance, the times we've reviewed them, the origin of the thresholds that I just mentioned, and the review subcommittee. We also had a few memos in our regular agenda materials that brought us all up to date. So let me ask and then I should mention too, a legal memorandum from our staff. Thank you, Ms. Prunty, identifying, and it was sent to all of our board members, but specifically to our chair and vice chair of regional planning about projects of regional significance. That was very recent. That was just a few weeks ago, October 13th, 6 weeks ago. So what we're here today to do, I guess I want to just open the floor for some general comments, and then I want to call on Jeremy to help get us squared away. But let me ask my colleagues, Mr. Hartung, Mayor Lawson, if you had any opening remarks before we kind of dive in. You good? Vaughn, good? Okay.
Yeah,
very good.
No, it's just, I'm just glad to get this back moving again.
Yeah. So Jeremy, we have listed on our to-do list to discuss possible direction to staff regarding this subcommittee, the timing and frequency of the meetings, who is on the subcommittee, subcommittee officers, goals of the subcommittee, and the work to be conducted. I'm chair just because they have made me chair when we last met. So I'm still chair until someone else would like to take over, would be just fine. And I'm also fine to continue on. So why don't you, though, I would like to get some information from Vaughn and Ed a little bit about, just to get us reoriented on the key issues that, from your perspective, brought us here so that we can talk about the going forward.
Well, for me, it was Hug High School. That was the big deal. I mean, we didn't really have much say so in that because it was under the generated trips although it does affect, I mean, we're seeing it now, they're widening the road and putting in roundabouts, change that, the complex of that neighborhood, that extend the turn lane on McCarran. To me, that's regional significance, and it affects not only the city of Sparks, but Washoe County, and not so much Reno, but it definitely is 2 out of the 3, which I think, in my estimation, if it affects 2 out of the 3 entities by some significance, that it should be a regional significance, a project of regional significance. So those are the kind of ones is, you gotta, and we don't know. I mean, you can say the high school is going to be 2,000 people, but when I grew up in Las Vegas in the 70s, and my high school had 5,000 students, and a high school only set up for 2,000, just because of population growth and couldn't build schools fast enough. So we could have the same issue here, I think. So where we have a school was approved at 2,000 trips, 2,000 students, and generates 3,000 trips a day, all of a sudden is generating 10,000 trips a day, is a real possibility. So I just want to see some of the numbers revisited mostly.
I'm just going to comment for a minute. I too had the same exact high school experience you did, Mayor Lawson. I also was kind of stuffed into a high school. I don't believe we had 5,000, but it was about 3,500, but it was a school built for about half that size. So we were on split sessions and got half a day of education, and there was some overlap, but to your point, twice as many people coming as what was designed for. And it was a real challenge. Well, over to you, Vaughn.
And I feel much the same way as Ed. Although my trigger happens to be Spanish Springs High School and Shaw Middle School, where you've got 2 major schools on a 2-lane road. It's almost a double project of regional significance. I mean, so much to the degree now where parents have no place to pick up their children at Shaw Middle School who are coming from both Sparks and Washoe County, and they're using the park next door and they're parking all over. So it's really created this huge impact. But I'm going to take it a step further. I think that if we're going to crack this thing open, I don't want to just look at schools. And by the way, it's only high schools and middle schools. But I agree with Mayor Lawson, where if we've got a school, we'll just use a school. But if we've got a business even that draws from multiple entities, and you've got people coming from sort of all sides, it potentially could trigger a PRS review. And I think that at the end of the day, it's not trying to single schools out, but schools seem to be the high school and middle schools seem to be the ones that are going up most rapidly in our communities. But we've got a WinCo going on right out here on Pyramid Highway, and that thing is going to generate a ton of influx. I guarantee you people will be traveling from Reno to come over to shop at that WinCo, because it'll be a really nice WinCo. It's going to be a nice store. We're excited to have it in Spanish Springs, but it's really going to cause some major traffic patterns. And I think for me, this is really a look at the traffic patterns in the region and what's happened to them. And I don't think we've kept up. Pyramid Highway, it can be a parking lot. And now we've got some major changes. NDOT wants to change the advanced warning signal systems, and you've got people coming from all over the place. And, we're not seeing widening in these major arterials. There's a lot in the mix. So I don't want to just single out schools. I'd like to crack open some other things. And I'd like to know from legal if we have to go to the legislature to change things like trips, because 6,200 trips, I guess it all depends on how you measure it.
Back and forth or one way or
right. How is that actually measured? How are those ADTs, those average daily trips, measured? And And do they just use because what we're seeing now, they just use a national manual. There's no real, no real before and after traffic count. And of course, after it's done, it doesn't matter because it's done. All the
I
permits
had
have been-
similar issues, and a similar example to Mr. Hartung was that I manage, or part of my ward is all of South Reno, which has been a really growth center. We've added 15,000 people in just this last 10 years. And one of the things that went in there, and this is maybe a little off topic, but I'd love to see it covered as well. They decided to site the new DMV down in South Reno, not on a major street, not on a highway, using all smaller surface streets to get there. And they had to put in one traffic light, but I had asked for two, and it looks like they're going to have to put in those two. So anyway, and there had already been people killed right on the streets where they were planning to put DMV because people drive so fast on those internal streets that are internal to the developments. So I would have liked, and there is another provision in state law that exempts the state from having to have a review. They had to get, I believe, a building permit only from the city of Reno and follow code, electrical code, plumbing code, that kind of thing. But they didn't have to do the planning piece that talks about traffic and trips and impacts and side roads and just congestion. And we have so much congestion. I would say I've got a complaint or more a day at this point on numerous intersections. And RTC did a big study in South Reno about 3 years ago that I begged them to do. And they're yet to implement that study. They're just maybe at the first project right now. And it was, now it's been 3 more years. And back then it was already a problem identified, and now it's incredible problem. So I've been talking to them, but I also have had the school issue. So Damani Ranch High School, a whole high school, was built with one road access, Rio Wrangler. And the traffic there, and then you combine it with the wild horses, and we've had numerous horses killed right in front of the school by young student drivers, who are kind of marred for life with that experience. Even with their parent in the car, having a 1,500-pound horse come through your windshield. Usually the airbags deploy every single time the cars are totaled. Nobody's been able to have their car survive such an impact. So that's another school issue. And I also had one other school issue I wanted to daylight now. This one was a charter school, and it was to be, it was a public charter school. So it was to be built within a development that was within another development. It had 2 county parcels, just 2 5-acre parcels, completely surrounded by city, never been annexed. The road was substandard, and they were going to put 1,000 children, middle school children, on a 5-acre parcel. And I love them. I mean, it's Coral Academy, but I mean, it was incredibly hard to get there. There wasn't enough room. I said, where are you parking for? You want to be an arts academy, you're going to have events, plays, those kind of things. Parents are going to come. Where are they parking? There is no parking. There was no parking. So that might be partly a Reno thing. It got settled. The county was very generous and worked on donating some land or some excess land up on Mount Rose Highway. And they moved over there where you have at least a major highway, some infrastructure to get there. But even then, that is a Reno County interface. It is exactly on the line of Reno and the county, on a major arterial, Mount Rose Highway. And so I think there's a lot of things for us to look at. You guys, I'm not repeating what you've already said. I'm just adding to the bucket here a little bit. So back to you, our legal counsel. Mr. Hartung asked a question.
So hold on just a second before legal gets in. And to your point, and this is not to castigate schools, but if you look in the RIF GAM, in the Regional Road Impact Fee General Administrative Manual, under schools, you'll find that that schools are exempted from paying RIF fees, and understood. But what that means now, and I'll give you a perfect example to this, and I know this seems as if it's a castigation of the school district, but so now Washoe County and RTC are working on widening Eagle Canyon, which should have been done when those two schools were built. And the cost is probably going to be $30 million. And because we're going to have, it might even be more than that. I might be low because we might have to take some, houses. And if we've got to take houses, then it goes into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Just to offset those impacts. And let me see here. I think I've got a note here of it's in 278B, 278B 160 subset parent 2 it just exempts schools from, in accordance with amendments made to NRS 278B, property owned by a public district is exempt from paying impact fees.
Yeah. And then I should have I realized I should have put my comment about the Doral Academy in context. I said 1,000 students on 5 acres. If it was a regular school, Washoe County school system, that would have been on 15 to 20 acres easily, not 5. All there was room was to drive in and drive out. And I don't know what it ended up in Washoe County. Maybe it's 10 instead of 5, but 5 was like the tiny postage stamp footprint of the school. So we have a lot of things, again, not schools, to your point, it's lots of things, but that's why we want to make sure you, Beth, are at the table and understand what's going on, and that we both, I think a result of this committee is that we can improve planning regardless of any state changes. I mean, nobody's limiting us. Nobody says the school can't pay impact fees. The school board could probably make a change there if they wanted to, or they could directly invest in the roads that the schools are on, understanding the school's going to have an impact. And I'm going to give you one example. Just in front of my neighborhood advisory board this week was the Rio Wrangler Elementary School, and down in South Reno. They wanted to put a beautiful walkway to, it's like improving the infrastructure to get to the school, but they hadn't quite designed it to standards. They just wanted to put an at grade, goes through a ditch. So there's pathways around the school. They wanted to take a new pathway, kind of a sidewalk, 5-foot sidewalk, bring it across down into a drainage and back up. And the NAB were really struggling and concerned. A number of those people have flooding backgrounds. They're concerned that the ditch that I'm calling it is actually a wider kind of detention area. It was going to be wet a lot. It's already wet from that last series of rain we have. It still hasn't dried out. And so I was very worried about how I was going to work with the Damani Ranch drainage system, who was going to maintain the culvert, how are we going to keep the sidewalk clear. They probably needed to make an elevated sidewalk. So we sent them back with some recommendations, and the city also had some recommendations, but that's a different kind of infrastructure, not just a road, but the walking path to get to the school. And, how does that all work? And really, Beth, I think one of our challenges, so we represent 3 different jurisdictions. We approve projects in 3 different jurisdictions, but it's interesting that all 3 jurisdictions are facing these same challenges with school siting, as an example. Just road impacts, sidewalk impacts, the safe routes to schools is a common topic that we want to talk about. So anyway, I'm sure this is a lot to kind of take all in. And so I just would like to ask our legal counsel, did she have some words of advice for us? This meeting, by the way, is really to just help us get organized, get us refocused, put a path forward, put an agenda of what we'd like the staff to do and so on. So it's just sort of getting to know each other and kind of globally and more specifically talking about the issues that we maybe want to be focusing on. So over to you, Ms. Prunty.
Thank you, Chair Dewar. Jessica Prunty for the record. I think as we discussed at the Regional Governing Board meeting in October, the Regional Planning Commission has statutory authority to enact projects of regional significance guidelines. In fact, they have a mandate where they have to enact guidelines. Under the definition of projects of regional significance in statute are the numbers that have been a topic of discussion. The Planning Commission cannot change those numbers because that would be contradictory to statute. So in answer to Mr. Hartung's question, if you want to change the numbers, that would have to go back to the legislature, excuse me. However, but there's another way to go about this. So those numbers originated with the enacting legislation in 1989. And then in 1991, the legislature expanded the definition of projects of regional significance. And there's no doubt from reading the legislative history and the statute that they meant to expand the definition. And the way they expanded it is by allowing the Planning Commission to enact guidelines where the Planning Commission makes findings that projects that do X, Y, Z have a significant impact. And there's various categories of the significant impact. But the one that I think seems applicable to this discussion at this time is if the Planning Commission makes findings of fact, and this is where, research and substantive evidence would need to be brought forward showing the significant impact so that we don't have an action that would be arbitrary, a significant effect on the natural resources, public services, public facilities, which includes schools or the regional form of the region. To me, that is fairly broad. And so if we can tie that means to me, my legal perspective is that the Planning Commission can go ahead and enact guidelines that address things outside of the numbers set forth in the statutes for those triggers for new development. It seems pretty clear that all of those numbers are triggers for new development where you have an increase in the region because of the new development of people coming in. So the legislature in its infinite wisdom realized we're not going to capture everything that could have an impact regionally with just those numbers. So there's fairly broad authority here, and it's just a matter of substantiating it. Yes,
Right.
Lawson.
Mr. Lawson.
So let me just, and it's just popped into my head here, is that we can make things more restrictive. We can't make them looser in NRS. We can
Yes.
be more restrictive in the local level, but not less restrictive.
Yes, and you can't adopt a guideline that would be directly contradictory to what's in statute. So for example, you couldn't adopt a guideline that says we're declaring any project that increases traffic by 1,000 trips daily, a project of regional significance. I think that would be ripe for a legal challenge because it would be directly contradictory to the statutes. But there would be another way of looking at it besides just using a traffic trigger. You could say projects that do of certain sizes, maybe you're talking about a certain combination of factors. And if they hit this trigger, then that becomes a project of regional significance.
So you're saying you think we could add like a new criteria?
Absolutely.
Like we couldn't maybe mess with their criteria, but we could say, like you just said, like an acreage size even.
Absolutely.
And that's
Coupled
not
with-
even addressed.
Coupled with population or anticipated traffic changes to the regional form and pattern. So there's creative ways to look at this that I think gives you a lot of discretion and leeway as long as we have the facts to substantiate the decision-making paradigm. And I think it would be helpful from my perspective. There's been a lot of different guidelines enacted and then removed. You see this back and forth over the years. And I think it would be helpful to have an analysis done of how those changes came about. Because my understanding, there's been no legal challenges to those guidelines in the past. And some of them are very specific to, calling out certain types of development projects. Others were more broad. And I think, if this body sticks to its past practice, sticks to the statutory authority, and have the facts to back up its decision-making, then you're going to be reaching a good decision.
So let me just ask on follow up to that. The one place you lost me was you said there had been these changes over time. And what I was unclear about, were they changes at the legislature or were they changes at locally?
Locally in the PRS guidelines. And I believe staff had prepared a history of the PRS guidelines, changes of what came in and what has gone out. And I found that pretty interesting of looking at those, what has been identified as, I think at one point in time, there was capital improvement projects of the Washoe County School District. So there is this ability for the body to enact very specific guidelines aimed at particular types of development, or taking a step back and thinking about it in different terms besides the statutory triggers. And another guideline that was enacted was an additional trigger, and it was a school student population trigger of 325 students.
And that was a
So
local trigger.
that was a local trigger. Yeah. So basically, if you have folks moving into the area and a development project that's going to have a net increase of 325 students, and I think this was in consideration of the school district's planning and how are we going to address this, that became a project of regional significance.
So that's a number that we set, just to recap, and I'll come right to you, Beth. I see your hands up. That's a number that we came up with, 325, that was adopted here. And we could
Yes.
adjust that number. With
Yes,
some,
that was at the peak.
presumably
That was,
some rationale, some evidence. I mean, not randomly.
yes, so that
Okay.
was at the planning commission level. And I think either for myself or staff that a to-do is to dig into that, the planning commission history of those changes, to see how they were determined and arrived at, and what the conversation was amongst the 3 local jurisdictions at the time.
Okay, that would be fascinating. So to you, Beth.
So much, Naomi. And I do appreciate you pointing out that I'm still very much skilling up on this topic. So bear with me as I get through these first few meetings. A couple things that I did want to point out, just so that it's clear for anybody that's following along, is that the school district really doesn't ever operate in a vacuum for really any of these schools. I know HUG in particular was of particular interest, but that was really developed very closely in partnership with the city of Sparks. And I think also Rio Wrangler also came up. Obviously, a few things to work out with that, but the district is also planning about $500,000 worth of work to Rio Wrangler Parkway. And the examples go on and on with that, so that anybody that's following along doesn't actually think that the school district is making these decisions alone. I mean, like, for example, they're working very closely with NDOT and City of Sparks and Washoe County, also with HUG. So there's quite a few agencies that are involved with that. But for my education, I would love for someone to fill in the blanks here about what I've learned is the facility master plan. I think it's the conformance review that happens with the regional plan and how that might fit into all of this.
Okay, well, great question for Dr. Smith.
Hi, thanks, Jeremy Smith for the record. Appreciate all the good discussion. Yeah, the facilities master plan is the affected entity plan of the Washoe County School District in terms of the regional plan. So we oversee the master plan efforts of City of Reno, City of Sparks, and Washoe County. We also have a series of affected entities, for example, the Regional Transportation Commission, and Washoe County School District is also one of them. And so what we ask is that, given there is a Washoe County School District Facilities Master Plan, that plan be submitted to TMRPA for review by the Regional Planning Commission to ensure conformance with the regional plan. That work has been done. In terms of, we worked with the school district to get that plan up to date. We brought it actually, I believe, maybe even before we adopted the regional plan, but certainly looked for conformance with the new 2019 regional plan. So that's designed to, just like it is with the RTC plan, get out in front of identifying any issues that are planned by an affected entity in terms of how it might impact the regional plan. We ask that if there are any changes to the facilities plan, that it's resubmitted to the TMRPA for an RPC review of that facilities plan. So that's been actually a great, there's always been a facilities plan, but the degree to which it's been updated was kind of hit or miss over the years. And so we've been working strongly together to keep that on track. And that's been our experience.
So Jeremy, I mean, is it updated annually, biannually, every 5 years? I mean, what's the schedule?
Well, it's updated at the discretion of the school district when they are making changes to the plan. Otherwise, it would be updated, it would be brought in for a new review anytime we update our plan. So we do a 5-year update mandate.
Right.
So 2024, when we update the regional plan, we will ask for all the master plans and all of the affected entity facility plans to be submitted to us. And we'll do that overarching review again.
Okay, so what do you think, Beth, having heard all that?
To be entirely honest, I would say that I'm still learning quite a bit, but I do know from the research I've done and the education that I've received on the school district side, that there is a degree of confidence in that that facility master plan and that process, and that the district has felt that that has been a thorough review that falls in line with the regional plan. Although we certainly understand that we can be reopening what would qualify for the projects of regional significance. Like, for example, since I am learning every step of the way, the district actually put together a great diagram for me so that I could see what those metrics were versus, for example, what HUG did not trigger in those 4 categories. But it is very helpful to learn from council the other ways in which guidelines could be implemented.
Okay, so that's good.
Madam
So
Chair,
what,
if I may,
yes, who asked? I'm sorry.
this is Jeremy.
Oh, Jeremy, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just one more quick point. We really appreciate the work that we've been doing collaboratively with the school district on the facilities plan. I think it does get us a long way towards what we're trying to achieve. The only one issue that comes up is that it does not include non-Washoe County School District schools, which could have, you know, commensurate impact that we don't have a way to view those. So that's just something to point out. Thank you.
So are you referring to these, for example, public or private charter schools?
Correct, absolutely. Yep, or any kind of private school.
Okay. And I wonder how we address that. Just, I mean, let's ask our attorney again. I mean, it only speaks to exempting Washoe County schools, and yet maybe all schools are exempt. And you're still on mute, just
Apologize, Madam. I'm not sure I understand the thrust of the
so
question.
explain it again, Jeremy, and then
Yeah, so I just was making the point that it's a great process, the facilities planning, you know, back and forth with the school district. But it is limited in the sense that it only covers Washoe County School District schools. And there's other school types, which, you know, were mentioned already in this meeting, that wouldn't be in that facilities plan at all. And we don't really have any way of seeing them at this time.
well, are they exempt was my question to our legal counsel, like by statute from planning of any type, other kind of schools, or do they just trigger local, you know, Reno, Sparks, Washoe County review criteria and they're never mentioned, you know?
Madam Chair, the Washoe County School District is an affected entity under your statutes, and therefore all affected entities have to submit their plans to regional planning. So they also have to submit annual reports and basically a facilities plan or the comparison thereof, which is why we see plans from RTC coming in, Tumwa, Washoe County School District. I think Western Regional Water is also an affected entity. So that's the reason why we have a facilities plan and jurisdiction in that regard with Washoe County.
So they are not specifically talk about any kind of private
No.
facilities.
So that's why they escape from having to submit a plan, charter schools. Public
I
or
mean,
private.
another area potentially of legislative, you know, change. It could just say schools instead of specifically just one kind of school.
As far as trying to make charter schools or private schools affected entities, I don't think that would be an appropriate legislative change. However, this kind of goes back full circle to the conversation of if any school is going to be cited somewhere, that perhaps even talking about the criteria and concerns articulated by Mayor Lawson and Commissioner Hartung that affects multiple jurisdictions. Does that have a significant impact then? Is there evidence and facts to support that has a significant impact upon regional form or pattern or other services? Potentially.
I will tell you the one that I was dealing with, Doral Academy. I suppose it could have been said it was 2 jurisdictions, but I mean, it was on county land embedded within the city. It was in the city sphere. There was one permitting agency. So, you know, it was just Reno. So I'm not sure if multiple jurisdiction would grab everything, but that was a tough one. And the city had to basically vote it down. I think they ended up withdrawing on the very last minute, very last second of the very last minute before the hearing began, because they could see the tenor of the room was not supportive. And so it was a really dramatic, we had 60 children sitting there on the floor. I mean, it was just, you know, and no one wants to go through that. So let me ask, someone here, and I think it was you, Ms. Prunty, brought up the idea of a review of how the criteria that we have adopted, the Regional Planning Commission, have changed over time and what they look like and the rationale for it. And I think that would be an excellent work document to present to this group.
I agree. I think it will be helpful.
So I see Mr. Lawson. Yes, unmuted.
Yeah. I think for me, we're concentrating on schools. Schools are just one part of all of
Right.
this. The other side that I'm thinking of is, with these guidelines, 938 employees, the housing units, all of those guidelines. What if I put a rock crushing plant up on my side of La Posada and Sparks? It doesn't meet the project of regional significance because it's not, it doesn't meet any of those thresholds.
We actually went through that problem. There was a proposed rock crusher in Reno that was on the line and for Verdi in the county.
Yep.
And a lot of county residents came out. We ended up denying it because, Reno wanted to, lean in and take into consideration the entire community. But it would have been good, to your point. I mean, there are some egregious uses. It creates a lot of dust, noise, and traffic. And I think what Ms. Prunty's offering is those things that we've done are not just schools. They are a broad range of changes. So I think it would capture, if we found out what they've already been done, then we could at our next meeting talk about what's missing from this list. What are some thresholds, to your point, that we might like to add? And then queue that up and bring that to the Planning Commission. Because for you, Beth, the Planning Commission sits as the actual regulatory body. And then we are kind of a reviewing body for, we're an appeal body. There's certain things like this regional significance, I think, Ms. Prunty, that we have to also weigh in on. Or maybe it's only if it's appealed. Could you address that? I don't know if we have original jurisdiction or if we have only appealed jurisdiction on those. The projects of regional significance.
The conformance review process now?
Yeah.
So you would have appeal jurisdiction. So the Regional Planning Commission determines whether or not a particular project conforms with the regional plan. And you've seen appeals on both sides of the equation. You've seen appeals from people who were opposed to the project and it was approved. And we've seen appeals where the project was denied and found not to be in conformance. And so that's where the governing board's jurisdiction lies in that regard.
Right.
As to Mayor Lawson,
go ahead.
just real quickly. For example, that to me sounds like an industrial use plopped in the middle of a neighborhood that maybe it shouldn't fit there. There could be criteria that says that has a significant, the industrial projects of certain sizes and types have a significant effect upon public services or public facilities or the regional form and pattern.
Maybe it's within, since we're regional, because undoubtedly an industrial use is going to, near residential is going to be looked at Sparks, for example, under their criteria for permitting such things. But the reason that might elevate it to our world, the Regional Planning Commission, is if it might affect multiple counties. Because Sparks might be just very fine with it, to your point, Mayor.
Yes.
And then maybe the county says, but like right across the street, we have this major residential thing. Maybe it's industrial on one side and residential in the county, and that causes a problem for us. And the biggest challenge, I think, is that often the staff all want to do the right thing, but they are both given their direction and limited by the criteria that are adopted for review. And if the criteria do not say that you have to look interjurisdictionally on impacts, they don't necessarily do that. I mean, I know they don't in Reno.
Yeah.
That's not a criteria we have.
That's exactly my point is using your example of the rock crushing plant, you had maybe the county citizens wanted to have it because it meant
They did
jobs.
not, but yes, they could have, but they did not.
But
Because
had-
of traffic they had elbow turning roads,
Right.
2-lane, no
for
breakdown
argument,
lane, blah, blah, blah.
let's
you
say they wanted it and Reno didn't want it.
Right,
Who did the county appeal to? Who did those residents appeal to?
right. Well,
Because-
we hear this all the time, frankly. They say we can't vote for you. We don't have standing, but they actually do have standing. You don't have to be a Reno resident, to my knowledge, to have standing to appeal a project that's right on a boundary. So there have been numerous appeals to my recollection, appealed by county residents about projects in city land, city annexed land that they weren't happy with. And they have won some of those appeals. You know, so I think you're bringing up a great case. So is a path forward. I mean, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Beth said that she has to leave a little before 3. We only have maybe 15 minutes before she has to depart. It is a nice kind of segue here to have this work done about what has changed over time, and then look at those things and then give us a worksheet or, you know, queue it up for us so that we can add some potential criteria, kick them around, maybe have the staff go back and see if any of these things make sense. Let's say it's this example was just brought up about the rock crusher. Maybe they would put a proposal together for us. We would evaluate it and say, yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking, vote, bring it back to the regional planning governing board.
Mhm.
What do you
I did
think?
have a clarifying question as well. And again, this is just as I begin to learn about these things with any potential guidelines, is how they would really be used. So would every project that maybe doesn't fit the current metrics for the projects of regional of significance, but it does trigger some of these new guidelines, would that automatically pull it into the process? Or would the body get to pick and choose which ones that maybe trigger the new guidelines and then can be pulled in? So I am curious about how those guidelines would be used to either pull in certain projects or not. So just something for the group to think about in the future.
Well, I'll answer and then I'll ask our attorney to answer, but my answer is just, look, if it's a criteria we've adopted, it's going to automatically get pulled in for our review, for the planning commission review. That's just what that's all about, is what is our
Absolutely.
scope.
We would have to have consistent enforcement all the
Yeah.
way through. And I'll let Dr. Smith speak to this, but my understanding is that mostly what this is, we adopt the guidelines and then they're used at the local level for the local jurisdictions to identify, oh, this is going to be a project of regional significance. We need to make sure that we let these folks know, and it's going to come up to regional for review.
Exactly.
So that's my understanding what the process works, but I'll let Dr. Smith speak to that.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Jeremy Smith, for the record. Absolutely. We work with our local planning partners to identify projects that, you know, trigger the guidelines, whichever guideline it is, whether it's one of the numeric thresholds or is it a hazardous waste site, or maybe it's a transmission corridor for electricity greater than 60 kilovolts. You know, we're also reading the development review memos that come through, looking for these PRSs if they're not identified to us, and we will provide an initial review memo. So from both directions, we're trying to catch these things as they come through. For the most part, we do, but sometimes there are cases, I'm thinking of the past year, I can't remember the exact specifics, but the Park Lane Mall site, for instance, I think we retroactively reviewed it as a PRS because of the way that it was administratively reviewed at the city, didn't automatically kind of trigger the process to go to regional, it wasn't recognized. So we are working with our partners to try to, you know, increase our filter so we catch these things as they come through.
Right. So I already just thought of another one when you mentioned that, not just rock crusher sites, but also I know the transfer station is struggling. Lines are stacking up. They're looking at expanding. They've got the stead already, but they're looking in South Reno. It could easily affect both county and city residents down there. So it's another one that I don't think we have a specific any kind of thing on that.
We do have currently transfer stations and hazardous waste disposal sites are included in one of the guidelines, and it's one of these non-numeric threshold type guidelines. So we do have.
I didn't realize that.
Yep.
We do have that.
Okay, well, just given the time, and I know everyone is, you know, we'd like to just kind of get in, do our work and get out. What if we do ask our staff, I don't know if we need a motion, but I think it's just direction to ask our staff to prepare the document you've recommended, Ms. Prunty, and then bring us back, even at the same time, so we could kind of keep the work flowing. Some areas you've heard about, Jeremy, that are problematic. We've already heard about an industrial rock crushing site that may be covered or may not be covered. But what are some examples of things where we think there could be potential conflicts, you know, where jurisdictions come together? And so that the next meeting we could review the what is, and we could talk about the what might be, and then sort of ask you which ones we're interested in pursuing. And then you could come back a third time, maybe with some detail on the ones that we would like to follow up on. I mean, how does that sound, everybody? I just want to use our time as well as we can.
I'd like to see what we can do to when the project affects two different entities.
Right. That's what I'm talking about. Like, we all have our own rules for some of these things.
You
So
know,
go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
that's my main concern is that, you know, even though you say that the county residents have standing in Reno, they really don't. Because, you know, at the end of the day, if that's in your ward, you don't have to worry about them. They're not going to vote for you. They could bring out the pitchforks and flames, and it doesn't really matter. So
They bring it up all the time, but what they do have is an opportunity for judicial review. And the standing question is really litigated at that point as to whether they are an affected entity by something any of our jurisdictions did, and they have to make their case that they have standing. So I will just share with you, very recently, our staff, our attorneys always used to have us take a vote on whether someone had standing. They have now stopped. They now say there's no point in predetermining that. Have your hearing. The judge will decide whether they have standing or not. And we'll make our arguments then. So this is a very recent change here in Reno. I don't know how it is, you know, in the other jurisdictions.
what that requires those residents to hire a lawyer, spend money.
Correct?
They have representatives that we can
Correct.
form. So that's my main concern. So can we get this to where it does affect two entities that we have an equal say so, and obviously at the Regional Planning Governing Board, all three entities are represented and make a decision from there.
Okay. So Vaughn, any thoughts as we kind of give our staff direction here?
No, you guys have given them all.
Covering it? Okay.
I've never learned anything by listening to myself talk.
Okay. All right. So does the staff feel like that is enough direction? And Ms. Prunty, do we have to take any motions, or is this a sufficient?
You could take take action if you would like, Madam Chair, to
All
give
right.
action as far as the
All
historical.
right. Let me ask a question. I know that Beth Smith is a non-voting member of the commission, but can she be a voting member of this subcommittee?
I don't think so, because the
okay.
subcommittee is comprised of the governing board
I
members
understand.
and
I
not
just
closed in.
asking.
I
Okay,
would,
so-
I would love to say yes, but I don't think that would be appropriate.
All right. So I'm looking for a motion to formalize the staff direction that we've been discussing.
Do we need to do that?
I don't think we
You
do.
don't have to.
Okay.
You don't have to.
I'll wait
I'm-
until everybody's done speaking and then I'll speak.
Yeah, I am comfortable with, that's what I was saying. I was comfortable with just giving some general direction. I am done. Mr. Hartung, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I think we've given staff plenty of direction. I think staff is very adept at understanding. I've never had an issue where I had to formalize a motion on this, in this initial stages. And so I think we've given Mr. Smith and Ms. Prunty enough direction, and I'm comfortable.
Okay. All right, I am going to close out this part of the meeting, and let me pull up my agenda here again. And I think we still have to, and I understand if you have to depart, Ms. Smith, we're going to close out 4A and move on to the reports. It'll be very short, I'm sure, but we will hear 5A, member and director's reports. And I'm going to just say, going forward, I don't think you need to do this on these subcommittee meetings, put all these reports on. But anyway, since you did, do you have any?
Madam Chair, thank you, Jeremy Smith, for the record. I'd be happy to take these reports off the agenda for future meetings. I have nothing to report. I just have a question I'd like to ask in terms of timing.
Okay.
I think from a reasonability perspective, given we have a couple of meetings coming up in early December and the holidays, I would anticipate we could bring this subcommittee back together in early January.
Yeah.
Does that seem appropriate?
Perfect. Yes.
Time, Jeremy, but this is not a super hurry. Remember, we put several years already.
Thank you.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So just do your doodle poll or whatever you did for sometime in January, mid to late probably, but mid is fine. Okay, then any directors would like to make a comment or give a report on anything?
No.
No. Okay, we'll close that item. Madam Legal Counsel.
Nothing to
Anything?
report, ma'am.
Okay. 6 is request for future agenda items. I think we've covered that. Anyone have anything to add? All right, we'll close out that item. Do we have any final public comment?
There's no in-person or digital public comment.
Okay. Any written correspondence, which you may also take off the list for future agendas for this?
Okay, sure will. We do not have any.
Okay. And then we're up to 9, adjournment, and I will just declare us adjourned, hearing nothing further. And so we're good. Thank you guys for your time. I think we're off and running. We've given the staff some good direction. Everyone have a good day.
Have a good day.
So much. Have a great
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Okay,
Thanksgiving.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.